Hello, guys, and welcome to this new episode of the Unexplainable Podcast. Stories span centuries, names whispered in darkness, and events so obscure they make even skeptics tremble. Witches, diabolical beings, or simply victims of superstition? For some, they were women out of their time, wise rebels, held for their forbidden knowledge. For others, servants of evil, creatures capable of curses, spells, and blasphemous rites. However, today I will not talk to you about myths or fables, but about three figures that really existed. Women once branded as witches or damned souls, whose names still evoke fear centuries later. Who were they? What secrets did they keep? And how much truth was there in the witchcraft accusations that made them legendary? So here are the three most powerful and evil witches in history. Even the most skeptical. The first witch I want to talk about is remembered as one of the most dangerous, powerful, and scandalous of her time. The one who provided the most disturbing confessions during the trial she underwent. Yet she is also the character who has generated the most doubts about her evil nature. Was she really as fearsome a character as thought? Isabel Goudie lived in 17th century Scotland in Aldern, near Nairn. Her life is a mystery. Her age is not known for certain, nor her final fate. Although it is likely that she was executed, as was usually the case for accusations of witchcraft, some doubts remain. She could also have been spared, returning to the shadows. As a simple farmer's wife, Goudie and her husband lived near Lochloy, roughly 2 miles north of Holden. Their life and social status were humble. Goudie could neither read nor write, but she possessed a great imagination and a surprising ability to communicate. Her day was dedicated to household chores, milking, baking bread, spinning, or hoeing the grass. But in April 1662, her life changed dramatically. For no apparent reason, Isabel decided to make a dark confession. For 6 weeks, through 4 separate accounts, she revealed to the authorities disturbing details about a hidden world of witchcraft, pacts with the devil, and encounters with supernatural beings. Goudie recounted that his first encounter with the devil happened at night in the church of Holdar. There, he would have renounced his baptism and received the mark of the evil one on his shoulder, from which he himself would have sucked his own blood. He spoke of secret meetings with other witches in places like Nairn and Inshock, where the devil, whom he described as a gigantic black man with ruddy skin and a cold body, possessed him carnally. His cloven hooves were sometimes covered by boots, but his infernal nature was undeniable. His revelations became increasingly disturbing. He spoke of grave desecrations, to use the bodies in their rituals, of spells to ruin crops, and of creating clay effigies to remotely harm the children of families living in the village. He confessed to flying in the night on magical horses, entering homes through windows, and feasting on libation foods. He said his coven danced in the presence of the fairy queen, known as the Queen of Elfheim, in a mystical place called Downhill, where terrifying demonic beings accompanied him in the dances. His story took an even more extraordinary turn when he claimed to have been able to transform into a raven, and along with his companions, take the form of a cat and hare. Just over 2 weeks after his first interrogation on May 3, 1662, Isabel Goudie released his second confession, an even more detailed and bewildering account of the practices of his congregation. He revealed the members' nicknames and the names of the dark entities serving them, including his own spirit. A figure in black would have been called Reed Raver, but he didn't stop there. He revealed as many as 27 spells more than any other British witchcraft case, some transcribed twice with significant variations. Goudie said the devil forged enchanted arrows, later enhanced by elf boys. Each witch received an allotment of these weapons, which were to be thrown in his name. There were no bows. The arrows were launched with a simple flick of the thumb. The effectiveness of these darts was lethal. It was enough for them to touch a person or an animal, even if protected by armor, to decree their death. On May 15, 1662, the witch appeared again before her inquisitors for a third confession. She reiterated her pact with the devil, stipulated after a meeting near the church of Holden, and she added new disturbing details about the fairy arrows, providing the names of those who had died by her hand and her covens. The revelations did not stop here. Goudie wrote about feasts in the company of the devil, confessed sordid details about carnal relations with the Lord of Darkness, including details about his anatomy. She also told of the cruel ritual to exterminate innocent children, revealing the macabre nursery rhyme that the devil taught her to curse them and cause their death. On May 27, 1662, she gave her fourth and last confession. Historian Robert Pitcairn, who reported the case in 1833, said this statement confirmed earlier ones and added more details about the congregation members. Thanks to her words and those of her accomplice, Janet Bradhead, as many as 41 people were arrested, and many of them were executed in cold blood. At that point, the fate of Isabel Goudie seemed already sealed. The Scottish authorities were convinced they had more than enough evidence to convict her of witchcraft, and for this reason, they requested permission from the Private Council of Edinburgh to conduct a local trial. Strengthening the accusation was also the confession of her alleged accomplice, Bradhead, among her own statements sent to the capital to be examined. However, there is an unusual element in the story. The Private Council, as early as April 10th of the same year, had issued a proclamation prohibiting the use of torture to extract confessions, except with explicit authorization. In the case of Goudie and Bradhead, it was established that their guilt would only be confirmed if the confessions were given spontaneously, in a state of mental health and without a desire for death. So it seems unlikely that his stories were extracted under torture. Why Isabel chose to confess is an unprecedented mystery in the history of witchcraft. That mix of fairy and demonic beliefs, without comparison. In other similar trials, more detailed than most of the testimonies of the time, they are both collected from traditional folklore and from the official reports of the courts. And this is where the mystery begins. What drove them? Why did Isabel tell those stories? And where did they originate from? There are several theories. The first is that she suffered from psychosis. All those fantastic, scandalous, and implausible stories could simply be the product of a disturbed mind. Certainly, a court engaged in a witchcraft trial would never differentiate a sincere confession from a stream of nonsensical words driven by a mental imbalance. Another theory, however, suggests that Isabel may have been a victim of ergotism at the time of the trial, an intoxication that could cause hallucinations and mental imbalances. The third hypothesis, on the other hand, is also the most rational one. Perhaps the woman saw in that mission of guilt a strategy to save her life. Confessing also meant implicit repentance and the chance to save oneself by turning in her alleged accomplices to divine justice. And if so, calling her a witch wouldn't be entirely unjustified. Don't you think? Still, as noted, her fate is uncertain. Whether she really managed to escape execution or died at the stake, well, it doesn't really matter. Her story continues to be studied and debated by academics. One of the most extraordinary accounts of witchcraft ever reported. La Voisine In 17th century Paris, amidst court intrigues and the mysteries of the occult, we find a figure as fascinating as she is terrifying, Catherine Monvoisin, better known as La Voisin. A fortune teller, poisoner, and witch, she led dark rituals. She became the focal point of the infamous Affaire des Poisons, the Poison Affair, a scandal that shook the French aristocracy to its core. To clarify, her black magic network and ritual killings allegedly caused over 1,000 deaths. Some estimates even speak of more than 2,500 victims. Little is known about her childhood, except that from a young age she showed talent in palm reading. She married Antoine Monvoisin, a jeweler and silk merchant, but when her husband's business collapsed, she was the one who took over the reins of the family. Behind the image of a businesswoman and enchantress, Voisin was a complex and tormented figure. She maintained a large family and had relationships with at least 6 lovers, including executioners, alchemists, and even magicians. One of them, Adam Lesage, even tried to convince her to kill her husband, but she backed out at the last moment. She offered her services as a midwife, also dealing with illegal practices such as clandestine abortions. It was just this. She also presented herself as a seer, capable of scrutinizing the future in the lines of the faces and hands of her clients. She herself claimed to have learned the art of divination from childhood, perfecting it over time with the study of physiognomic techniques. Over time, however, her work as a palmist turned into something decidedly darker. She noticed her clients always wanted the same things: to make someone fall in love, to get rid of a rival, to inherit a fortune, or even the death of a spouse in order to remarry. It was then that she realized she could monetize these desires in a more direct way. This is where the story of the real witch begins. She started with simple advice: visit a church, pray to a saint, wear an amulet. Then she moved on to selling love potions that contained macabre ingredients like toad bones, mole teeth, mugwort powder, and even human blood. The most desperate and dangerous requests needed even more extreme measures. For those willing to do anything, La Voisine organized the dreaded black masses, secret ceremonies where her clients could beg the devil to fulfill their desires. It is said that during these rituals, officiated by corrupt churchmen like Etienne Guibourg or Abbé Mariotte, a human altar was used. A woman laid out upon which a chalice was placed. Even more terrifying tales tell that the blood of Nonati was poured into these cups during the ritual. But whether those children were really sacrificed or if they had already died of natural causes remains a dark unknown. La Voisine did not act alone. She had a network of accomplices, including Adam Lesage, who handled the more complex magic operations. Her business involved nobles, aristocrats, and even members of Louis XIV's court who turned to her to obtain what law and morality did not allow. And power, when it becomes too great, inevitably attracts the wrong attention, like that of Madame de Montespan, the king's favorite, which proved fatal to her. The relationship between Catherine and Montespan began in 1667, when the latter, eager to secure the eternal love of Louis XIV, turned to her to celebrate a black mass. For years, Madame de Montespan relied on Voisine whenever her position at court seemed in danger. In 1673, when the king lost interest in her, she turned to black magic again. New black masses were celebrated, officiated by Etienne Guibourg, during which Montespan herself would have lain naked on the altar. But not only that, Voisine also provided her with powerful aphrodisiacs that the favorite secretly administered to the king in an attempt to keep him tied to her. However, when the threat of a new royal love became concrete, magic was no longer enough. In 1679, Louis XIV fell in love with Angélique de Fontanges, and Madame de Montespan made a drastic decision. If he dared to leave her, he would die. She called Voisine and ordered her to take care of both him and his lover. So the woman gathered her best poisoners, Trianon, Bertrand, and Romani, and prepared a plan. The poison would be hidden in a petition that the king would receive directly into his hands. But alas, it was destined to fail. On March 5, 1679, the crowd at the court of Saint-Germain was too large, so the king did not accept the petition. It all ended in a damp squib, but the darkness surrounding Voisin did not go unnoticed. In those years, France was shaken by scandals and fears. The mysterious death of the Duchess of Orléans, recent executions of poisoners like Madame de Brinvilliers, and rumors of satanic rituals fueled public anger. A witch hunt broke out in Paris. In 1677, a fortune teller named Magdalene de Lacranche was arrested for poisoning, and in an attempt to save herself, she revealed the existence of an entire network of fortune tellers and poisoners operating in the capital. In January 1679, police discovered the crimes of well-known fortune teller murderers Marie Bosse and Marie Vigoureux, and he realized he was facing a vast and dangerous conspiracy. On March 12, 1679, shortly after attending Mass at Notre-Dame de Bonne Nouvelle, Catherine Monvoisin was arrested. Her fate was sealed. A royal commission, led by stern magistrate Gabriel Nicolas de la Reynie, began investigating her crimes. Among the evidence collected, some testimonies were deliberately censored from official documents. Too shocking, too dangerous to be disclosed. When Catherine was arrested, her maid Margot uttered some disturbing words. According to her, Voisin would have dragged along people of every social rank, and I wouldn't be exaggerating at all. Transferred to the Vincennes prison, the woman was subjected to long interrogations. On December 27, 1679, Louis XIV decreed that the entire network of poisoners and witches was to be exterminated, regardless of sex, age, or social class. It was the beginning of the end for an entire criminal organization. During the interrogations, the woman admitted to selling poisons and practicing magic arts on behalf of influential clients, but denied any connection with Madame de Montespan. However, she confessed that Paris was infested with similar practices and that an unimaginable number of people were involved in the trade of poisons and spells. The most macabre accusation involved her alleged use of her oven to burn remains of fetuses too large to be buried in her home's garden. Voisin strongly denied such accusations, claiming to only possess purgatives for her family. However, her reputation was already tarnished. On February 17, 1680, Voisin appeared before the judges, and 2 days later, the sentence was issued. She was to be burned for witchcraft. In the following days, she was formally questioned, but the same officials denied that she had been subjected to torture. On the morning of February 22, 1680, she was taken to the Place de Grève to be burned at the stake. On the way to her death, she rejected the priest who wanted to offer her comfort. And, once tied to the stake, she desperately tried to push away the straw piled around her, but there was no escape. The flames consumed her in front of a crowd intoxicated by the spectacle of justice. However, Lavoisin's shadow remained even after the pyre's smoke cleared. Months later, her daughter Marguerite revealed a shocking secret: Madame de Montespan's involvement in satanic rituals and poisoning plots. The testimony caused panic at court. The king closed the investigation, sealed the records, and sent the remaining accused to hidden prisons, away from public scrutiny. Thus ended one of the darkest and most scandalous episodes in the history of France. Lavoisin's name would be remembered as a symbol of black magic, poisons, and conspiracies on the edge of reality. Elizabeth Bathory. I know, I'm sure you didn't expect to hear the name of Elizabeth Bathory in an episode about witches. Her bloodthirsty reputation makes her seem more like a vampire. Few realize Bathory was among the most devoted black magic practitioners of her era. She was introduced to the discipline at a young age, reportedly leading her to commit unspeakable crimes. For this reason, calling her a witch is more than legitimate. But let's look at her story. On a cold night in 1560 in the Hungarian village of Bathory, a girl was born who was destined to become one of the most disturbing figures in history, Isabel Bathory. Raised in the midst of Transylvania in the family estate at Exhed, Isabel belonged to a noble, powerful, and deeply disturbed lineage. The Bathorys were famous for their blue blood, but also for their inner ghosts. Among them were warriors, valiant cardinals, a king of Poland, and not a few afflicted with epilepsy, schizophrenia, and other mental disorders, poisonous fruits of incest between cousins. Elizabeth, now known by that name, displayed a troubling dualism from an early age. She could switch from icy calm to uncontrollable fits of rage in an instant. But it was an incident when she was just 6 years old that marked her forever. Legend has it within the castle walls, she witnessed a brutal punishment inflicted on a man accused of selling his own children to the Turks. The scene was chilling. The belly of a horse was ripped open, the condemned man was stuffed alive inside, and then sewn in with his head sticking out like a macabre sentinel. Elizabeth, still a child then, watched everything, and something inside her broke or awakened. At just 11 years old, she was betrothed to Ferin Nadasdi, a young count known for his brutality in battle. At 13, she saw another horrifying scene. Her cousin, the Prince of Transylvania, had 54 people mutilated. Before her, another step toward becoming the monster. At 15, she married Ferenc in a lavish ceremony so significant that the Holy Roman Emperor sent a valuable gift. Ferenc was often away fighting the Turks, leaving home frequently. The power passed into the hands of Elizabeth, who outwardly appeared as a noble woman, careful and protective, but who, it is said, hid dark secrets. In the absence of her consort, she did not just patiently wait for his return. No, the young Countess preferred visiting her Aunt Carla, a decidedly eccentric woman known for organizing orgies and dark rituals. It was in that context that she met Dorothea Sentes, known as Dorka, a woman expert in black magic, accompanied by a disturbing servant named Torco. Both became her teachers, revealing the secrets of witchcraft and awakening in her something far more dangerous, an insatiable thirst for cruelty. In a letter to her husband, Elizabeth recounted a new delight learned from Torco. Take a black hen, kill it with a white rod, collect its blood and smear it on your enemy or on his clothes to curse him. This was not just a ritual, it was a foreboding of what would happen to anyone who dared to challenge her afterwards. To her, a servant's disobedience was intolerable. Anyone who tried to escape from the castle was punished in a horrible way. One night, a 12-year-old girl managed to escape, wearing only a white shirt, but she was captured. Elizabeth had her locked in an iron cage so tight that she could neither sit nor stand. Lifted with pulleys and swung against sharp points, the child was torn apart by one of her servants, on her order. On another occasion, she demanded that some girls who had disobeyed her order be stripped and tied up in the courtyard in the middle of winter. Then she ordered that water be thrown on them until they froze to death right before her eyes. The real madness started when, during a torture session on a young girl, a drop of her blood landed on the Countess's hand. Elizabeth became convinced that the skin at that spot had rejuvenated. She consulted alchemists who, eager to please her, told her what they assumed she wanted to hear, the confirmation of a popular belief. She told them that the blood of virgins, if used for bathing or drinking, could grant eternal youth. For Elizabeth, it was a revelation, and the myth became an obsession. It is estimated that her murders began in 1585. But after her husband's death in 1604, the Countess gained full control of her estate and became even more powerful and ruthless. Disappearances rose, starting with peasant women, then minor nobility's daughters. In 1609, she opened a fake academy for wealthy girls, luring them into her castle. But once inside, the young women were chained, tortured, their throats slit, and their blood collected for the Countess's macabre rituals. At the beginning of the 17th century, a whisper began to spread with fear through the dark corridors of Hungarian castles. Countess Elizabeth Bathory, a powerful noblewoman, was accused of horrific crimes. Between 1602 and 1604, the rumors gained strength thanks to a Lutheran pastor, István Magyari, who not only publicly denounced the Countess, but took his accusations all the way to the imperial court of Vienna. In 1610, Emperor Matthias II tasked György Thurzó, the Palatine of Hungary, with investigating the case. Thus began a systematic collection of testimonies. Within a few months, over 300 people were questioned. The stories that were brought to light were simply chilling. Young farmers vanished, their tortured bodies found buried, and high society girls who, sent to the castle to learn noble manners, ended up never returning. According to testimonies, horrible tortures and murders were perpetrated in the castle, but none of the statements came from direct victims. The stories seem to be partly built on hearsay. Thurzó, who led the investigation, had political ambitions. As an ally of the king, he wanted his son to become Transylvania's prince. Eliminating Bathory and discrediting her family could open many doors. The arrest took place on New Year's Eve of 1612, when the man stormed the castle. According to legend, they caught her red-handed, covered in blood, in the middle of a torture ritual. But the reality is quite different. Elizabeth was simply having dinner at that time. No one questioned the young survivor found in the castle, and no tangible evidence was presented. The trials that followed were swift and brutal. 4 of the Countess's servants, after being tortured, confessed to horrific crimes and were put to death in horrifying ways. But even here, contradictions abound. No official document of the time proves that the population complained about Elizabeth, not even for a stolen chicken, which at the time would have generated complaint letters. The most terrifying claim credits Elizabeth Bathory with up to 650 victims. It is based on a single statement from a servant who said she had read that number in her mistress's private book. Unfortunately, that book was never found, and the court official who could have confirmed the story never did. On January 25, 1611, Palatine György Thurzó wrote to King Matthias, announcing he had captured and confined Elizabeth Bathory in her castle. While the investigations continued in a complex path and political plots with the Prince of Transylvania, the Countess was confined within Mora's gloomy walls, where she would spend her final years. On the evening of August 20, 1614, something changed. Bathory, now 54 years old, complained to her bodyguard. "I have cold hands," she said. He had no idea what was about to happen. "It's nothing, my lady, go to sleep," he replied. But in the morning, the Countess never woke up. She was buried in the village church on November 25, 1614. However, it is said that the locals strongly opposed this honor for a woman so feared and presumably ruthless and cruel. According to some sources, the body was then transferred to her birthplace, Exit, and buried in the Bathory family crypt. Today, no one knows for sure where her body rests. In the church and the castle, there is no trace of her tomb, as if the earth itself wanted to erase the evidence of her passage. In short, Elizabeth Bathory's life was marked by bloodlust, terrifying practices, and deep mystery, and several uncertainties. There are even those who claim that the stories about her cruelty and thirst for blood are actually part of a plot, a political conspiracy. A widow, immensely wealthy, owner of vast lands and strategic fortresses, she was a perfect target. In a Hungary torn by religious wars and power struggles between Catholics, Protestants, and the Habsburg Empire, Bathory was a Protestant, while the central power, her accusers, were Catholics. Moreover, King Matthias II owed her a substantial sum of money, a debt that curiously was canceled after her arrest. Today, her figure thus moves between legend and reality. She has become a dark symbol, an icon of horror folklore, a bloodthirsty witch, convinced that eternal youth flowed in the veins of her victims. Maybe deep in Transylvania, some still whisper her name in fear. And these girls are the 3 most powerful and evil witches in history. But what do you think of these 3 characters and their story? Let me know in a comment. The Unexplainable podcast is created by Luca Perella, with sound design by Matteo Di Alessandro. If you like this episode, leave a like, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, or share it with your friends. Goodbye. See you at the next Unexplainable appointment.